Today we're going to completely reframe everything you thought you knew about the fall of one of history's absolute greatest superpowers. Most people just assume the Ottoman Empire was ultimately destroyed by stronger, more modern European armies. But as we're going to uncover today, that assumption is entirely wrong. The reality is, by the time the empire lost its biggest wars, it had already spent more than a century quietly hollowing itself out from the inside. So, let's just rip off the band-aid and confront the biggest myth right out of the gate. The empire wasn't actually killed by foreign armies. It essentially committed institutional suicide. It didn't lose its future in some sudden dramatic clash of empires on a bloody battlefield. No, it lost its future the exact moment it stopped learning from a changing world around it. I get it. It is so tempting to look at the massive, violent shock of World War I as the fatal blow. But the actual truth is buried in centuries of quiet, everyday decisions made in comfortable palaces and ministries. Decisions that slowly eroded the empire from within. The real cause of the collapse wasn't some invading force waiting beyond the frontier. It was thousands of small, manageable compromises made in financial ledgers rather than military campaigns, unraveling the foundations over generations. For centuries, the Ottoman system was literally the envy of the world. They controlled the crucial crossroads between Europe and Asia. But that unparalleled success, it actually created a massive psychological trap. They didn't just fail to adapt. They suffered from what we call institutional certainty. They started mistaking their incredible past stability for absolute permanence. Instead of seeing their achievements as a result of making good, adaptable decisions, they began viewing them as undeniable proof that their specific way of governing was permanently correct. When new technologies or financial systems popped up elsewhere, they just dismissed them as temporary fads. So when a few visionary leaders finally did try to step up and modernize, they hit a brick wall of self-interest. Religious authorities were terrified of new ideas. Military elites aggressively protected their ancient, outdated privileges, and provincial brokers fought to defend their local wealth. The very institutions that built the empire in the first place now had a massive vested interest in keeping things exactly as they were, and that led to endlessly delayed, watered-down reforms that basically just pushed real problems into the future. The collapse of the empire's foundational strength wasn't its military. It was its financial integrity. Because once a state loses its financial credibility, the decline accelerates in ways that armies alone can never, ever stop. To fund their massive ambitions and rising government costs, the state quietly began debasing their primary silver coin, the akçe. Now here's the thing. A coin doesn't actually lose its value when less silver is added. It loses its value the moment everyday people realize less silver has been added. This quiet debasement didn't just cause runaway inflation for ordinary merchants and farmers. It fundamentally destroyed public trust in the government. The empire wasn't just experiencing a shortage of coins anymore. It was experiencing a severe, fatal shortage of trust. So how do you survive a massive shortage of trust and cash? Well, they turned to European loans, and that set off a devastating timeline of mounting obligations that grew way, way faster than the Ottoman economy could ever sustain. Honestly, borrowing just seems so much easier than tackling the deep, painful economic issues. But those new debts were just being used to pay off old debts, creating this vicious snowball effect they simply couldn't escape. In that snowball leads us directly to 1875, the ultimate tipping point. The empire fully defaulted on its immense debts. This failure led directly to foreign creditors stepping in and establishing the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. These foreign powers took direct control of Ottoman taxes on highly profitable local industries like salt and tobacco. Just imagine that, without a single invading army ever capturing the capital. The empire quietly signed away its sovereignty and completely surrendered control over its own future. It absolutely crushed the blacksmiths, the shopkeepers, and the farmers. Empires don't survive because of fancy palaces. They survive because ordinary people believe tomorrow is going to be better than today. But desperate for quick revenue, the state started selling tax collection rights to private contractors who paid high prices up front. And that meant these contractors ruthlessly squeezed the villagers during every drought or poor harvest, just to guarantee their own profit. Every bad season became an excuse to seize a farmer's livestock or tools. The ordinary people weren't deciding the empire's future anymore. They were quite literally being forced to pay for its past. As you can imagine, this massive economic hardship heavily fractured the famous millet system. That was the framework that had historically allowed Muslims, Christians, and Jews to govern their own communities and trade peacefully together for generations. But now, they were forced to view their lifelong neighbors as competitors for basic survival. As the economy weakened, people naturally retreated into smaller, tighter circles of trust. Rumors traveled way faster than facts, and it was scarcity, not diversity, that ultimately broke the social fabric of the entire empire. The Tanzimat reforms. So, realizing the immense danger they were in, Ottoman leaders did attempt major changes, known as the Tanzimat reforms. They built railways, opened modern schools, and created brand new ministries. Basically, they were trying really hard to modernize the shiny exterior, while actively struggling to repair the rusted-out machinery underneath. But this sequence perfectly captures their fatal loop. Adding complexity to a failing system only makes that failure much more expensive. Think about it. A crisis demanded a reform. The reform required money. The money meant taking on foreign debt, and that new debt ultimately reduced their independence to actually fix anything in the first place. The state got larger for sure, but it definitely didn't get stronger. They weren't solving problems anymore. They were just managing their own decline. Wars expose frailty. By the time the world wars arrived on their doorstep, they weren't actually the cause of the collapse. They were simply the final examinations, exposing a completely hollowed-out society. War just exposed the deep weaknesses that decades of peace and institutional decay had managed to hide. Which brings us to a genuinely profound mystery, one that applies to modern leadership today just as much as it did to the Ottomans back then. How did so many intelligent people miss this quiet collapse while they were living right through it? How does an empire full of gifted commanders and brilliant architects completely fail to see the ground shifting right beneath their feet? Well, the terrifying answer is that decline is just an accumulation of reasonable, comfortable decisions. It's delaying a difficult reform for a few years, or borrowing just a little bit more money to bridge a gap, all made under totally familiar assumptions. No single decision looks catastrophic on its own, but together, they ensure that the very institutions that originally built a great civilization morph into the ultimate obstacles to its survival. It is a terrifyingly simple progression. Habits of success become traditions. Those traditions become unquestionable, and once the questioning stops, the ability to learn disappears entirely. That right there is the absolute most dangerous moment for any organization, state, or empire. Not the moment it loses a battle, but the moment it convinces itself that the future will always seamlessly resemble the past. The Ottoman experience is a timeless warning for us. Historical success is never, ever a guarantee of future survival. The greatest threat is always the arrogant belief that nothing needs to change. They didn't lack intelligence. They didn't lack cultural brilliance. They just accidentally built a system that gradually became far better at protecting itself than it was at correcting itself. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this haunting thought to reflect on, especially when we look at the massive institutions we all trust today. Every single generation inherits structures built by those who came before them. The real challenge is deciding which ones genuinely deserve our protection and which ones require the courage to be completely transformed. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the foundations around you.